Welcome to A Story for You. We are reading Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder with the pictures and illustrations by Garth Williams. We are in Chapter 7. The Sugar Snow. For days the sun shone and the weather was warm. There was no frost in the windows in the mornings. All day the icicles fell one by one from the eaves with soft smashing and crackling sounds on the snowbanks beneath. The trees shook their wet black branches and chunks of snow fell down. When Laura and Mary pressed their noses against the cold window pane, they could see the drips of water from the eaves and the bare branches of the trees. The snow did not glitter. It looked soft and tired. Under the trees, it was pitted where the chunks of snow had fallen, and the banks beside the path were shrinking and settled. Then one day Laura saw a patch of bare ground in the yard. All day it grew bigger, and before night the whole yard was bare mud. Only the icy path was left, and the snowbanks along the path and the fence beside the woodpile. "Can I go out to play, Ma?" Laura asked, and Ma said, "May, Laura." "May I go out to play?" she asked. "You may tomorrow," Ma promised. That night, Laura woke up shivering, and the bed covers felt thin, and her nose was icy cold, and Ma tucked another quilt over her. "Snuggle close to Mary," Ma said, "and you'll get warm." In the morning, the house was warm from the stove, and then Laura looked out the window, and she saw that the ground was covered with soft, thick snow. All along the branches, the trees of the snow were piled like feathers, and they lay in mounds on top of the rail fence and stood up in the great white balls at the top of the gatepost. Pa came in, shaking the soft snow from his shoulders and stamping it from his boots. "It's sugar snow," he said. Laura put out her tongue quickly to a little bit of the white snow that lay on the fold of his sleeve. It was nothing but wet on her tongue, like any other snow. She was glad that nobody had seen her taste it. "Why is it called sugar snow, Pa?" she asked him. But he said he didn't have time to explain just now. He must hurry away. He was going to Grandpa's. Grandpa lived far away in the big woods, where the trees were closer together and larger. Laura stood at the window and watched Pa, big, swift, and strong, walking over the snow. His gun on his shoulder, his hatchet and powder horn hung at his side, and his tall boots made great tracks in the soft snow. Laura watched him till he was out of sight in the woods. It was late before he came home that night, and Ma had already lighted the lamp when he came in. Under one arm he carried a large package, and on the other hand was a big covered wooden bucket. "Here, Caroline," he said, handing the package and the bucket to Ma, and then he put the gun on its hook over the door. "If I'd met a bear," he said, "I couldn't have shot it without dropping my load." Then he laughed. "If I'd have dropped that bucket and bundle, I wouldn't have had to shoot him. I could have stood and watched him eat what's in it and lick his chops." Ma unwrapped the package, and there, 2 hard brown cakes, each as large as a milk pan. She uncovered the bucket, and it was full of dark brown syrup. "Here, Laura and Mary," he said, and he gave them each a little round package out of his pocket. They took the paper wrappings, and each had a little hard brown cake with beautifully crinkled edges. "Bite it," said Pa, and his blue eyes twinkled. Each bit off a little crinkle, and it was sweet. It crumbled in their mouths. It was better even than Christmas candy. "Maple sugar," said Pa. Supper was ready, and Laura and Mary had their little maple sugar cakes beside their plates. And while they ate the maple sugar on their breads, After supper, Pa took them on his knees before the fire and told them about his day at Grandpa's and the sugar snow. All winter, Pa said, Grandpa has been making wooden buckets and little troughs. He made them out of cedar and white ash, for those woods won't give a bad taste to the maple syrup. And to make the troughs, he split out little sticks as long as my hand and as big as 2 fingers. Near one end, Pa cut the stick in half and split one half off, and this made a flat end with a square piece at one end. And then he bore a hole lengthwise through part of it, and with his knife he whittled the wood till it was a thin shell with a round hole, and the flat part of the stick was hollowed out till it made a little trough. He made dozens of them, and he made 10 new wooden buckets, and he had them all ready when the first warm weather came and the sap began to move in the trees. Then he went down to the maple woods, and with a little bit he bore a hole in each maple tree and hammered out the round end of the little trough into the hole, and then he set the cedar bucket on the ground under the flat end. And there is the buckets, and there is them putting the buckets down to collect some maple syrup. The sap, as you know, is the blood of the tree, and it comes up from the roots, and when warm weather begins in the spring, it goes to the very tip of the branch and twig to make the green leaves grow. And when the maple sap came to the hole in the tree, it ran out of the tree, down the little trough, and into the bucket. "Oh, didn't it hurt the poor tree?" Laura asked. "No more than it hurts when you prick your finger and it bleeds," said Pa. Every day Grandpa put on his boots and his warm coat and his fur cap, and he goes out into the snowy woods and gathers the sap. With a barrel in the shed, he drives from tree to tree and empties the sap into the buckets, into his barrel, and then he hauls the big iron kettle that hangs by a chain from the cross timbers between 2 trees. He empties the sap into the iron kettle with a big bonfire under the kettle, and he boils the sap. And Grandpa watches it carefully. The fire has to be hot enough to keep the sap boiling, but not too hot to make it boil over. Every few minutes, the sap must be skinned. Grandpa skims it with a big, long wooden handle that he made out of a basswood. And when the sap gets too hot, Grandpa lifts ladlefuls of it high in the air and pours it back slowly. This cools the sap a little, keeps it from boiling too fast. And when the sap has boiled down enough, he fills the buckets with the syrup. And after that, he boils the sap until it grains when it cools in the saucer. So there is Grandpa collecting the sap. And there is Grandpa boiling it. See? Between the trees. And then watching it carefully so that it doesn't boil over. The instant the sap is graining, Grandpa jumps to the fire and rakes it all out from beneath the kettle as fast as he can, and he ladles the thick syrup into the milk pans that are standing ready, and the pans with the syrup turns the cakes into hard brown maple sugar. "So that's why it's a sugar snow, because Grandpa's making sugar?" Laura asked. "No," Pa said, "it's called sugar snow because the snow this time of year means that men can make more sugar. You see, this little cold spell and the snow will hold back the leafing of the trees and make the sap run longer. When there's a lot of sap to run, it means that Grandpa can make enough maple syrup to last all year for common and everyday. And when he takes his furs to town, he will not need to trade so much for store sugar because he can only get a little to have sugar on his table when company comes." "Grandpa must be glad when there's a sugar snow," Laura said. "Yes," Pa said, "he's very glad. He's going to sugar off again next Monday, and he says we must all come." Pa's blue eyes twinkled, and he had been saving the best for last, and he said to Ma, "Hey, Caroline, there will be a dance." Ma smiled. She looked very happy, and she laid down her mending for a minute. "Oh, Charles," she said. Then she went on with her mending, but she kept on smiling. She said, "I'll wear my delaine." Ma's delaine dress was beautiful. It was a dark green with a little pattern all over it like ripe strawberries. The dressmaker had made it in the East, in the place where Ma came from when she married Pa and moved out to the West to the big woods in Wisconsin. Ma was very fashionable before she married Pa, and a dressmaker had made her clothes. The delaine was kept wrapped in paper and laid away. Laura and Mary had never seen Ma wear it, but she had shown it to them once. She had let them touch the beautiful dark red buttons that buttoned the basque all the way up the front, and she had showed them how neatly the whalebones were put in the seams inside with hundreds of crisscross stitches. It showed how important the dance was if Ma was going to wear the beautiful delaine dress. Laura and Mary were excited. It's a cat and the fiddle. They bounced up and down on Pa's knee and asked questions about the dance until at last he said, "Now you girls run along to bed. You'll know all about the dance when you see it. I have to put a new string on my fiddle." There were sticky fingers and sweet mouths to be washed, and then there were prayers to be said. And by the time Laura and Mary were snug in their trundle bed, Pa and the fiddle were both singing while he kept time with his foot on the floor. "I'm Captain Jinks of the Horse Marines, and I fed my horse on corn and beans, and I often go beyond my means, for I'm Captain Jinks of the Horse Marines. I'm captain in the army." And that is the end of that chapter. That's all for our story today. Be sure to let your parents know to like and subscribe. And if you have any comments that you want to talk to me about the story, or questions that you have, or information that you have, you can tell your parents and they can put it in the comments. And then if they set up their phone or their computer, when they subscribe, then they can click on the bell, and that'll tell you every time I put a new video up. I enjoy getting this time with you. Bye-bye.